Okay, so first, I actually want to talk about some project status examples. Project statuses are a big part of keeping your projects page organized because it makes sure that you're never looking at a full list of every single project that you have going on. It helps you, kind of separate things out by where each project is at in your overall process. And that makes it much easier to stay on top of, maybe where your clients are getting stuck or where, you need to put in some attention to your projects. And we get asked a lot, probably the second most frequently asked question behind what's a good workflow I should use is what is an example of the project statuses I should have. So I wanted to share with you today a few examples of project statuses, for different industries and different uses to kind of get the gears turning. That said, I do want to preface this by saying everyone's everyone's client process is different. Even two of you in the same industry, the way you like to work versus the way your neighbor likes to work, it's probably going to be different. The way your client process goes is not something that is necessarily standard to all photographers, for example. So, it really does come down to having that outline of the steps that you want to follow with your clients, how you want to work with your clients and deliver that experience. That plays a huge role in keeping things organized. So, with that in mind, we do have some examples here. Let me try to increase the size a little bit more so you can see better. Let's talk about just a general use set of project statuses. So for general use, we're looking at, just going through a basic onboarding process while the project is a lead, and then, just the steps of working with the client once that project becomes a job. Of course, it is up to you when you'd like to consider a project a lead and at what point you'd like to start considering them a job. But most frequently, that's going to be after the client signs your contract and pays either in full or some sort of deposit. So you can see in our general use example here, we go through some new inquiries. Those would be brand new projects maybe being generated by a lead capture form coming into Dubsado. Then you might do a consultation. So you want to keep track of when the client books that consultation. And then probably after the consultation, you'll send a proposal. So you want to keep track of, who you've sent those proposals out to. Maybe you want to also keep track of who you've had to follow up with, so you can really build this out to match the steps of your onboarding process. Likewise, in the jobs area here, once they become a job, I'm assuming that I would send out my onboarding questionnaire after the client has signed and paid. So that would be my first job status. So they would, kind of move over that way. And after they fill out the questionnaire, I would need to do some work for the client. So I'd put them in a to-do status. And then once I'm done, I'd put them in awaiting final payment and send out their invoice. And then finally, when I get that payment back, I would deliver the work and take them to that next status. So hopefully this is starting to give you an idea of how you can kind of find those major milestones in your process and match those to some project statuses. A couple of other examples, if you are in an event-based industry, so all of your work with the client is leading up to a particular event, like a wedding or a really big photo shoot, you can do a sort of event-based set of project statuses. Onboarding would be similar or the same to the general purpose statuses, but then for your job statuses, maybe creating those statuses more by time that is passing. So a couple of standard ones here, looking for a questionnaire to be completed, but then maybe there's a set of tasks that you need to do 60 days out from a event date 30 days out, 2 weeks out, and so on, just to kind of keep track of what you have coming down the pipeline. This is another great approach to those project statuses. Down here, we have some more industry-specific examples. So something like photography. Again, onboarding is going to be pretty similar from industry to industry. Really just depends on what you include in your onboarding process. Do you have a consultation call? Is there another questionnaire? You're just looking at what those steps are. As part of, a job set of job statuses for photographers, you're probably looking at the main parts of fulfilling a photography shoot. So looking at what shoots have been booked that are coming up this week, which ones need post-production, when your sales appointment's coming up, and then maybe a pipeline if you ship out physical goods, looking at the steps there and making sure each one is covered. Coaching and consulting can be an interesting example because unlike something like photography, there may be less in terms of steps in the job portion. It's just, kind of once you onboard that client, they are a client. So you can see there are actually less statuses in the jobs area here. But maybe that onboarding process is a little bit more robust and has more steps to it. So again, you can really customize this based on your situation. Project statuses also do not need to be linear. So here we have an example for a design type of industry, maybe web design, calligraphers, branding designers. So you still would have your onboarding process. You might have an extra step to actually prepare a proposal if you have a consultation with a client and instead of more of a template proposal, you need to prepare one of those custom package proposals we looked at in the last webinar. You might want a separate status for that to keep track. But then in the job portion of the statuses, it might not be straight all the way through. You might, present the client with a first draft and then be awaiting their feedback. And then maybe they give you some feedback and they actually move back into needing another draft. So you can, the project doesn't necessarily have to move completely from left to right across the screen. Especially in a case like this, it's helpful to kind of be able to move the client back and forth between these two statuses. It makes a little bit more of the space on the page. And then finally, kind of after you go through those draft and approval rounds, you can then finish them out in more of a linear fashion. And finally, just a kind of, again, very general example with phase-based work, those longer ongoing projects, maybe something more like web design, interior design, architecture, anything where you are working in kind of these larger chunks of the project that are well defined. You can identify those phases. Maybe in between some of those phases, you might have an additional questionnaire or a scheduler that you want to keep track of. So those are some ideas for the project statuses that you can, start to think about in terms of how your process works. And you may have noticed throughout these examples, some of the examples are about, did you send the scheduler? Some of the examples are more based on the client completing something, such as, let's see here, the questionnaire being complete by the client. And I have some tips up here for you. So if you want to keep track of how many clients are getting maybe stuck or bottlenecked at a certain point in your process, you can use a status to keep track of when you sent something. So if you're keeping track of everyone you sent a proposal to, you see a lot of clients piling up there, that might be an indication that you need to make some changes to your proposal process. Alternatively, if you want to keep track of something that you need to do on your end, you might want to use a status to track when your client completes something themselves. So if you need the client to complete their questionnaire before you can get started on the work, that's where, you might have a questionnaire complete status to make sure that you review that information before moving on.